Well, I have finally sunk to the bottom of the barrel in terms of topics today. Ladies, gentlemen, and all those in between, this is Lily Orchard, a somewhat infamous media critic, and I have disagreed with some of her videos before, as one does, and I even defended her in a previous commentary, but never before have I wanted to commentate on her. Like, there are already a lot of videos on her, and I'd rather not just be another member of the herd, but then I saw the video I'm talking about today, titled, "Stop Making Villains Like Magneto, They Suck." And I have to make one thing clear, I am not making this video because I like X-Men. In fact, there is like one point in this video that I actually do agree with.
Now, Magneto is the main villain of X-Men, a story about the persecution of people who have a genetic mutation that gives them superpowers. It's a very dated metaphor for racism in the 60s, and the films are a very dated metaphor for LGBT youth in the 2000s.
Yeah, it is kinda odd how X-Men in this series is here to say, don't be racist, whilst mutants are often unstable and destructive with their abilities, even though the reason why you shouldn't be racist in the first place is because real-world racial minorities aren't inherently destructive, and it would actually make sense to keep some kinds of mutants in check within the context of the stories. So you know what? You get 1 point, Lillian Orchid. That does not salvage the rest of this mess though, so let's actually explain why this video sucks now.
So there's a sentiment among people that villains are always better when they're complicated and sympathetic. It's become a part of fandom's growing tunnel vision, and that they believe that there is one objectively best set of tropes for a story, and if they can find it, then their mere presence will make the story better. Fandom likes to believe that there is only one good kind of story to tell, they just need to find it. They'll always respond to criticism of a trope's execution as if it's criticism of the trope itself, and almost always repeat the line, "It works if it's done well." But fandom doesn't really think in terms of done well. If the trope is present at all, it's done well in their eyes.
See, this is something I've noticed Lily does a lot. She tends to talk in a very vague sense when referring to her opposition, and yet this often leads to overgeneralizations. The villain in Disney's Big Hero 6, for example, is a sympathetic villain by nature, since he turns to villainy to rescue his daughter, who's trapped in another dimension, and yet the common consensus on this character is that he's awfully written because he didn't actually need to turn to villainy. So no, the idea that people automatically think sympathetic villain equals good always doesn't actually exist, and I have no idea where you're actually getting this from.
Additionally, there's a bit of a social desirability bias in that fandom will often say that they love complicated and sympathetic villains, and yet at the same time, where their actual viewing habits are concerned, their favorite villains tend to be far less complicated. I'm guilty of that too. My favorite villains are the opposite of complicated or sympathetic. They're very simple megalomaniacs and don't have an ounce of sympathy in their dry, brittle bones. But I also have a documented dislike of stories that try to make their villain sympathetic. Why? Well, let's answer that question in an increasingly roundabout route for the sake of audience metrics.
Wait, wasn't Amon from The Legend of Korra only using the idea of non-benders being oppressed by benders as a facade for a more nefarious goal? Why is he the example here?
This is known among some people as the boiling kittens in lava trope, where a group is established as having a very real grievance in regards to oppression, and they decide to achieve their goals through an extremely nonsensically evil ploy that makes absolutely no fucking sense, and is clearly ham-fisted to concoct a narrative about them going too far.
I swear, this is something that Lily brought up in her own video on The Legend of Korra.
Season 1's Amon is a socialist activist who cares about the oppression of non-benders by benders, until it turns out that he doesn't and was just lying and just wants to kill the benders because he's mad about his abuse of daddy. And all that Occupy Wall Street iconography falls away because the writers didn't think Occupy Wall Street was a valid protest.
Then why is this picture being flashed on the screen in the first place if he isn't even an example of an oppressed villain? Isn't that what this video is about in the first place? Oppressed villains and how they're poorly written? Like, he doesn't suddenly become an oppressed villain because daddy issues. Oppressed villains are usually oppressed by society.
What a delightful surprise.
Magneto's whole shtick is that he's a Jewish Holocaust survivor who sees the impending discrimination against mutants as another Holocaust waiting to happen, and is determined to not let it happen even if he has to get violent to do it. Now, your first thought upon reading up on Magneto's backstory and motivation is probably, hang on, why is he a villain again? This was, for a very long time, a pretty fucking massive glaring issue with the comics. You have a Holocaust survivor seeing the signs of genocide creeping in and goes, oh fuck that noise, and is trying to stop it, and he's the bad guy.
Yeah, that just happened. Lily Orchard is out here questioning why Magneto is the bad guy.
You can only throw so much sympathy onto them before it becomes a question of why they're a villain in the first place.
And I felt like when this happened, my jaw hit the floor because, that ain't it, Chief. Like, do you actually know what Magneto wants to do in order to prevent a potential mutant genocide? Well, Magneto hates humans in general, and he's essentially a mutant supremacist. He wants to commit a genocide of his own. He wants a genocide against humans. In other words, he's essentially resorting to more than just violence. Like, not to sound insensitive or anything, but even if Magneto was once the victim, victims can still eventually become bad themselves. May I remind you of when Hitler was a child, his father used to beat him? May I also remind you that Magneto is the leader of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants? Now, do you want to know how many times Lily mentions that Magneto is essentially a mutant supremacist? None. Zilch. Nada. Not once does she do this. You don't get to say things like this.
Magneto's new-ish backstory is pretty bog-standard sympathetic villain fodder. Namely, heroes plead to the moral sensibilities of an oppressor, and trying to end systemic discrimination by force is a bad, naughty thing for meanie-poos.
Without acknowledging that Magneto is essentially a mutant supremacist.
If this does not scream tacit support of the status quo to you, you're clearly not paying attention, and this framework has existed all the way up to the modern day, where even though Magneto has long since stopped being a villain in the comics, in film adaptations, he's still a Holocaust survivor, and still the bad guy for no reason.
There are thousands of men on those ships, good, honest, innocent men. They're just following orders.
I've been at the mercy of men just following orders. Never again.
You know, never again is a real thing that real Holocaust survivors say all the time, and here it's repurposed into a declaration of villainy.
You heard it here, folks. Those who are victims will always be the victims in every context ever, no matter what. Like, I know I'm being kind of strawmanny here, but the point is, Lily, do you even pay attention to this situation? Do you even know about Magneto's own bigotry or the tragic irony of his situation? Well, actually, she does mention Magneto's tragic irony in the comments, but she refutes this very, very badly. Essentially writing it off because, oh, that's what fascists say about anti-fascists. So essentially, she is writing off a point that is technically correct because of reasoning that is barely even related. Joy.
Civil rights activists trying to overthrow an unjust status quo are right to do so. It is the morally correct position.
What do you mean, the morally correct position? Morality is completely subjective. Morals are completely subjective. Like, as much as I hate the fact that gay people are killed in some places for being gay, the reason that happens is because different people have different standards, and therefore, they have different morals. Morality is subjective. So you cannot build arguments on the basis of this is right and just.
A victim of abuse, torture, or rape trying to kill her abuser in vengeance is right to do so.
And the fact that people disagree with that notion proves that morals are subjective. Oh my god! So if something's a fact, then you can't really disagree with it, or else it's like you look stupid. But here, someone can just like disagree with the notion that someone should get vengeance upon their abuser and stuff like that. So Lily is kind of framing something as if it was more objective than it really is.
If you're someone who thinks civil rights protesters go too far when they're disruptive, they aren't the villains of that story. You are.
This video made me an atheist. Okay, so I was originally going to leave this interjection as a joke, but then I noticed something. If you think civil rights protesters go too far when they're disruptive, they aren't the villains. You are. So I cannot be upset if they burn down my house or workspace, or else I'm comparable to a villain? Good to know. Like, of course that doesn't happen in every protest ever, but sometimes protests become riots. But oh no, guys, I guess I'm the villain now. now.
Chicken.
Your wages are stagnant because your boss is a greedy little shit who only cares about increasing his big pile of money, and nothing he says can change that, and all of his hardships are worth laughing at.
That's right, guys. Your boss was the real villain we meet along the way. I don't have much to say about the rest of this video, so let's just jump to the end.
The problem with my idea for these kind of villains is that they inherently make white viewers of any gender uncomfortable.
That's a nice argument. Unfortunately, you're white. Okay, here's the part where I give final thoughts. So my final thoughts are that I did your mom, and Lily likes Rey from Star Wars, so her opinions are automatically bad. Okay, bye! Mama, I'm a criminal. Mama, I'm a criminal. 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 Mama, I'm a criminal.